Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. A+. All right, just logging into my laptop. 1 second here. I'll also just add as a note while I'm doing this. If you hear me or see me fumbling about with the, oh, it cut out again. Okay, we'll see how this microphone goes. Anyways, fumbling about or hear me fumbling about, I recently broke my right hand, my dominant hand. So I'm having a fun time exploring using devices with one hand right now, which you can witness during this talk. Also, do I have the correct microphone? This keeps cutting in and out. This is the right one?
Yeah, this is the traveling.
Okay, this microphone also seems to be having some problems, so we are going to do our best. And if somebody from the nerdery can find out if there's a better microphone. What'd you say? We'll find out. That's the worst one? Oh, I see what you mean. All right, we're going to try this microphone. Maybe we'll swap back and forth between 2 microphones as one breaks out. It'll be fun. It'll be an adventure for all of us. I hope you're all very excited. Okay, cool. Oh, this one sounds better. Neat. Yeah, keeping me on my toes. Cool, okay, so this is how to deliver an accessible and inclusive presentation with me, Fen. Wow. If this is what you're here for, welcome. If this isn't what you're here for, well, sit down and eat some food and pretend you were here to listen to this talk. I do have my slides available for you. The link is bit.ly/2 capital X, lowercase w, lowercase k, lowercase e, capital E, capital N. That's where those slides are live right now. So feel free to follow along as you'd like. And yeah, as was said in my lovely introduction, thank you again. My name is Fen Slattery. My pronouns are they, them. That means when you're talking about me, like, oh, I went to this talk tonight and the speaker was really cool. They had some nice things to say and I really liked them. That's how you do that. My Twitter handle is Sublime March. If you are live tweeting this, use that hashtag A11YCHI. You're also my new best friend, and I will personally give you a high five if you live tweet this. So sorry, old best friends. And yeah, a little more about Click. I'm not here on behalf of Click. I just think we're cool and we're hiring. We are a digital firm that, for lack of a better, this microphone keeps cutting out. Does anybody have microphone tips? No? Okay. It keeps cutting out. This isn't going to work very well. Thank you.
I don't know what I can do.
Yeah, sorry, we're trying to, I don't want to have you all deal with this microphone cutting in and out as I'm giving a presentation about accessible presentations, right? How ironic. Oh yeah.
Try this one. Try that one. And then we're going to
Okay, we'll see if this one sticks around better, huh? I think it's about the same volume. I'm not walking too far away from that, so I'm not sure. All right, well, we're just gonna keep sticking with it, and I'm gonna keep apprised of this microphone cutting out. What was I saying? Oh, I was talking about Click, blah, 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 we're cool, whatever, blah, 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 something like that. Essentially, as we mentioned in my introduction, we're a consulting firm that works with a huge variety of clients. I'm the accessibility lead over there, and I think the one thing I can say that unifies the sorts of institutions that we work with, places you may have heard of like Northwestern or the Lincoln Park Zoo or some company named McDonald's. For the most part, they're all organizations that aren't evil, I think is one of my favorite things to say. And look at my coworkers that are here. I can usually feel pretty confident that I'm working with companies that just actually want to do good things and help people. It's proven by the fact that we're like a 50-person company and we have a dedicated accessibility professional, which is me, so that's cool. I'm also a co-organizer of some meetup called the Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup in Chicago. I don't know who those people are. Yeah, cool, that's me. So why am I the person giving this talk? Well, I speak at roughly one event per month on average over the last few years. Either privately at companies, I'm invited in, or running workshops, meetups like this, big conferences all around the US, whatever. Speak at a lot of things. I also mentor people who speak at tech industry events. I have a cute pull quote here. from Carly Ho, who is an engineer here in Chicago, who does a lot of awesome work just a lot of awesome work in the WordPress space, as well as inclusion of autistic people and Asian Americans in tech. Her quote is, "Fen has been an exceptional person to have on my side in developing talks, mostly because they will literally drive to my house and tell me that my talk is good until I believe it." Yeah, I help people. That's nice. Maybe you believe me. More importantly, though, because I give a lot of talks at events, I attend a ton of tech industry events. So I've seen a lot of talks, and I've seen a lot of ones that do a pretty good job of inclusion and accessibility. And I see a ton that do a bad job of this. Some egregiously bad, don't get me wrong, but a lot where just people haven't thought about it. The other important thing to know is that I'm a person, due to identities I have and invisible disabilities, that is personally impacted by inaccessible and uninclusive talks. So I'm an expert in a lot of different ways. But I also want to know a little bit about who's here. So we're going to go around the room. You're each going to introduce yourself. We're not doing that. I'm mostly interested if I could just get like a raise your hand or give a shout or indicate in some way for me. If you've given a talk at like a meetup or a conference or something like that, raise your hand, make a noise. Okay, got a smattering of folks, maybe 8 or so. Maybe raise your hand for me if you want to give a talk. If you haven't yet, you're interested, okay, maybe about half the room-ish, that's okay, that's okay. And can you raise your hand for me if you have been to a talk in some way that has made you feel crappy or unsafe or like they forgot you exist or that just wasn't accessible to you in some way? Raise your hand. So about half the room, okay, maybe 2/3. Well, I'm very happy for those of you that have not had that experience, or maybe you just don't want to raise your hand, and that's fine too, but there are a lot of us that experience things like that. Maybe we should all raise our hands because this microphone keeps cutting out. Oh, well, we're all in this together, I guess, now, but that's fine. Some assumptions I am making about you, and of course this does also include my lovely folks in the live stream right now. I'm not forgetting about you, don't worry. The assumptions I'm making about all of you is that you've been to a meetup or a conference or something like that before. You're at a meetup right now, so I think that's safe to assume. I'm also going to assume that because you're here at this inclusive design meetup, you care about people, and that you already feel that inclusion and accessibility is important. There are a lot of talks that do awesome work in explaining why inclusion and accessibility matters and why we should value it. This isn't one of those talks. I'm going to assume that we're all on board with caring about people. Yay! I'm also going to assume that you want to do better, either in your talk or you want to see other people do a better job. So, what are we going to talk about? Well, I have an agenda of 7 little things. We're going to talk about why you might present a talk of some kind, things to think about before you commit and agree to give a talk. 3 is preparing the talk. 4, slide design. 5, the day of your talk. 6, during your talk. And then 7 will be taking care of yourself. Oh, that's nice. It's a nice note to end on. Some notes for you to know. First off, I'm going to be using the concept of like conferences and meetups like this as examples. I'm going to be using conferences and meetups as examples throughout this. But all of this advice I'm going to be giving and thoughts and opinions, I mean, they could apply to giving a toast at a wedding or a presentation at work for your boss or speaking at a protest or anything like that where you're addressing a group of people in some way. So just as a note. Other notes, I am not perfect. I'm sorry if you were expecting a perfect person to give this talk. And this talk will also not be perfect. Chances are I'm going to mess up something at some point, or my microphone's going to drop in something like that. And that's okay. This also isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, where like if you do everything I say, you're going to be 100% perfect and no one will ever be mad at you. No, sorry. I am hoping to get you about 90% of the way there, though, for an inclusive, accessible talk. And 90% is like an A-, so that's pretty good, right? I think we're fine with that. My other note is that we should breathe, and it's going to be okay. That's for me, and that's for you. I often find that when I give a talk that's like a lot of advice about like, don't be jerks to people, it can be really easy to be kind of tense as an audience member, like hearing that, you know, and either thinking defensively like, oh, well, I don't do that. I'm amazing. I don't mess it up. Or to think, oh, I'm awful. I'm mean to people. I screw this up all the time. I see some people like nodding their heads, right? It's easy to feel like that. So we're here together. It's going to be okay. I believe in you. Can I get like a half-hearted yay? That was not half-hearted. That was too genuine. Oh, that's fine. We're going to work on being more half-hearted together as we go. All right. So first thing, why present? Give a presentation. Well, because you have to. Someone told you. You have to do it for a grade or work or I don't know. Maybe it makes you feel good about yourself. That's pretty nice. That's good. You like to. I don't mean to flippantly say you like to hear yourself talk, but you like to, you like the experience of being up here, and that's cool. Maybe you want to educate people. Maybe you want to entertain people. And all of these are perfectly fine reasons. But I want you to think about who your talk is really actually for. I'm sorry, but your talk isn't for you. You're not doing it for you. Maybe you're going to get some stuff out of this, don't get me wrong. Like, still going to feel good and, get a grade or whatever, but it's not for you. It's also not for the people you work for. It's also not for the event hosting you. I'm sorry, this is a lovely meetup, but this talk is not for us, the co-organizers. The talk is for your audience. It's not about you. It's not about the people who are paying you. It's not about the people who invited you. It's about your audience. Who's that audience? Now, first obvious part of the audience is the people physically in the room, observing you, listening to you, seeing you, whatever. People physically here. Yeah, go in the room, people. It's also people watching a live stream, if there's a live stream. Hi, YouTube people. I think the camera's over there, maybe. Yeah, okay. It's also people who are watching a recording later on. I know this is going to be up on YouTube later, so hello, future people. Oh, wow, time travel. It's also people reading a transcript. Either, it might be live captioning, but maybe reading a written out transcript of your talk afterwards. It's also people who are reading your slides. Maybe you've put them up on Speaker Deck or Google Slides or whatever. Mystery future people reading through your slides are also your audience. Pause for effect. So if your talk isn't tailored to your audience and all those different parts of your audience, what's the point of giving your talk? It's not for you, it's not for the people paying you, it's for that audience. So if you don't care about them, why are you doing it? This is a part of this talk that's a little bit more opinion. This is my philosophy about giving talks. And you don't have to agree with it, that's fine. We'll just fight about it later on Twitter or something. I believe that with talks, particularly ones like this right now, like at a meetup or a conference in the tech industry, your duty as a speaker, as a presenter, is to inspire emotion first and to educate your audience second. The reason I think this is that people need to care about what you're saying. Either like they think it's funny, or they're mad about something with you, or they're scared, or some emotion that this inspires in them. If they don't care about what you're saying, they're not going to retain it or take notes as you're talking, or go home and tell somebody, or research about it more later. There's so many talks I have been to in my years in the tech industry that were really informative and very educational, and I didn't do anything with it because the person sitting up there was just trying to read a book to me, essentially, right? And that can be okay. There are times and places for those talks, but it's my belief it's more important to get you all to care about a thing, so that way you'll go home or go to work or wherever you're going to go and learn more about it and research more about it and try to get better at it. So that's my philosophy. And that'll kind of be interwoven throughout this talk. Okay, so related to that, if your audience doesn't trust you or care about what you're saying, or that they're not empathizing with you about the emotion you're trying to convey, what's the point of giving that talk? If they don't care, well, why are you doing it? I posit, and I hope we can all agree, therefore, that inclusive talks, that is, talks that are caring about the audience, thinking about the audience, what they need from you and what they want from you. Inclusive talks will help an audience trust you and will help that audience care about what you're communicating. Huh, neat. I also said I wasn't going to explain why we should care about inclusion. So I hope we're still all on board with care about people. Okay, so this is going to be the part of the talk that is a lot more just specific advice. So I hope you're ready. We're going to have time for questions at the end. The second part, before you commit to giving a talk, first, the main question I need you to think about is, should I be the person to give this talk to this audience? There's 3 parts to that question. You, the audience, and the talk. You need to remember that you have the power to enact change as a speaker. What do I mean by that? Well, maybe you've been invited to speak at a meetup like this. Or you propose to talk to a conference. Or, I don't know, your friend is getting married and you're giving a talk, whatever, right? Somebody wants you to be giving that talk. Maybe they're even paying you to do it, right? You have power in that relationship. And I know that can sound scary, especially when we're folks who are not necessarily used to having power in an interaction, but they want you there. Most of the time, a lot of the time, I would say, the folks who invited you to give you a talk are willing to make little changes to things based on questions you ask or things you suggest. So here are some questions that you should be asking to help ensure that your talk is inclusive. These are questions that you should be asking of the organizers of the event, or if there's no formal organizers, asking the people who are helping you put it on, whatever, you get the idea. Questions. Will there be a microphone? And sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes that answer is okay. Maybe it's you and 3 people sitting there. You don't need to have a microphone, but there should be a microphone. You should ask, will there be live captioning? Not everybody always has the resources for that, but boy howdy, I'm aware of some that are relatively inexpensive that I think are even being tried out right now. That's really cool. Live captioning, you can do it pretty cheaply. You should also be asking, what's being done to make the physical space accessible? And there are a ton of things underneath that. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time, but that's a great broad question to ask. You should be getting some answers about thoughtfulness around making space for mobility devices, reserved seating for mobility devices, making sure there are required stairs to enter the space, things like that. There's a lot, but they should be thinking about it. Other questions to ask. Is there a code of conduct at this event? And can I see it? Are your staff trained on that code of conduct? On these slides, I'm using COC as an abbreviation because I didn't feel like typing it, I guess, I don't know. Is your staff trained on the code of conduct? Do they know what it is? Do they know how to enforce it? Because it doesn't really help protect people at an event if the staff doesn't know how to use it, right? You should also ask if you and the other speakers will be given guidance on inclusion. Now, maybe after this talk, you're gonna be an expert, right? You're gonna know a ton about giving an inclusive talk, but not everybody else speaking at this event has seen this talk, right? You wanna make sure that the other speakers at the event, if there are other speakers, are also giving inclusive talks for their audiences. And in general, you should ask what's being done to make the space inclusive and safe for people. This could include things like gender-neutral restrooms. This could include things like making sure there's a diverse staff running the event. There's a ton of stuff under this umbrella and a lot of really good resources online. We can talk about that in another talk. But in general, you should ask. You should know the environment you're about to walk into when you're considering giving this talk is inclusive. Okay, next. Research your audience. Just ask the organizers if there are any. What should I know about the audience? Simple. And they'll tell you things like, oh, maybe they're of a certain age or certain experience or things like that, right? Don't walk in to a talk assuming things about your audience. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Other ways you can research the audience are looking up previous talks. So like, for example, if you were invited to speak at this meetup, you might look at previous topics that this meetup has had, other previous talks. That might give you a clue about the sort of audience for this event. You can also find photos of previous events, maybe last year's conference, last week's meetup, whatever. Another one is to read through the event hashtag on Twitter and look at what people have said about the event in the past. It'll give you an idea of who's there and also what they're liking and not liking about it. And there's a lot of information to decipher. I said, though, you shouldn't assume things about your audience members. Things to not assume. Don't assume that your audience members can see you or see you well. Don't assume that your audience members can hear you or hear you well. Don't assume that they can communicate back to you in some way, either verbally or non-verbally. And don't assume that your audience can understand your meaning all of the time, either because, for a wide variety of reasons. We'll just leave it at that. Don't assume those particular abilities of your audience members. Also, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are things I often see people mess up, specifically in like the tech industry at events like this. Don't assume that all of your audience members have a job. Don't assume that everybody's like working as a programmer or something like that. Don't assume that your audience members are all of a similar certain age. I'll often see at events people assume, oh yeah, we're all millennials, or like, oh, we're all older folks. Like, no. I know the tech industry is very skewed towards younger ages, but don't assume that your audience is all young. Also, weird things I see people in talks assume, especially ones about diversity and inclusion. Don't assume that your audience members all do or don't have kids, or all are or aren't married. And that's kind of weird. Maybe you're sitting here if you haven't seen that, and you're like, what? I couldn't even count the amount of times I've seen people say stuff like, oh, so you know when your wife does blah, when your wife does blah, blah, blah. Or like, oh, isn't it suck when your kids blah, blah, blah. Or like, oh, now none of us here yet know what it's like to have kids, but believe me, someday you'll have kids. It's weird, I don't know. People like to use these things as examples, and it feels like shit when you're not part of that assumed group, right? The other thing to not assume that is often assumed, specifically in diversity and inclusion events, don't assume that your audience is entirely white, or entirely straight, or cisgender, or able-bodied, or all men. Now, I think in this room, we might think that's a little weird that some people might assume that, but specifically, I'll see this come up a lot when somebody is giving a talk about allyship in some way, right? Like, maybe somebody is going to an event it's about disability or something, right? And the speaker will speak to the audience, assuming that everyone in the audience is abled and is helping the poor disabled people, and that none of us here know what it's like, right? Or people assuming that everyone in the audience has no idea what their experience is like, when often that's not the case. So yeah, don't make an assumption like this about your audience. The other thing that's important to remember is to consider your own identities, especially if your talk is about diversity and inclusion. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're speaking about the experience of other people, consider, don't do that. Make space for other people. I was recently at an event, not in Chicago, that was a tech industry conference, and the final keynote of the event was about diversity and inclusion. And the person who was up there, after he introduced himself, said, now I know, what's a white guy doing up here talking about diversity and inclusion? And then he proceeded to tell just stories from his own life that he was discriminated against because he's from a European country that isn't the United States, as an example of diversity and inclusion, which is kind of weird. Instead of him being the one to give that talk about the problems a lot of us face in the industry, consider stopping, either sharing the stories and amplifying those of others, or ideally take a step back and let other people speak. However, there are talks that are about allyship, which is entirely valid, and I would argue that this is my talk, despite speaking as a person who, like I said, is impacted by these problems. I mean, there are lots of different identities I don't have, so this is kind of an allyship talk. Do your research and be humble. You don't know everything. Don't assume the experiences of other people, and speak from what other people have told you. Don't make assumptions. So if you consider all of that, if you are a good person to give this talk, like if you're a good fit, either you're speaking about something you have experience with, or you're gonna do the work of being an ally, and it matches with your audience, the audience, fits that and who you are, and it fits the talk, then go ahead and do it. Then you have a decent chance of giving an inclusive, accessible talk. Okay, so preparing your talk, you've decided, I am going to commit, I'm going to give this talk. There's a lot of stuff you have to do to prepare. And a lot of these, you'll find, are things that I did in preparing this, so we'll use that as an example. First off, look at your talk description as the basis for organizing your talk. That's what your audience read to decide, do I want to come to this, right? Maybe some of you said, oh, Accessibility Chicago is putting on a meetup. I don't care, I'll go to anything. But probably a lot of you read the talk description to decide if you wanted to go. Same thing if this is a meeting you're inviting somebody to at work where you're going to present something, right? Follow that description that you previously wrote and make sure that what you actually create matches that. You don't want to surprise your audience with a talk that isn't actually what you said you were going to give. Next, use clear structure in your talk. I encourage you to think about, in the sections of your talk, what question each section answers. That will help you think of what the purpose of what you're saying is. This will make your structure and the organization of the talk make a bit more sense. Also think about how each section connects to one another. Maybe you're telling a story throughout. Maybe there's an order, maybe there's whatever it is. Make sure that there's some organizational structure to the talk. And share that structure. I really suggest sharing your structure explicitly via some kind of agenda in your calendar invite for the meeting, or as a slide in your talk, or as some sort of descriptive outline at the top. It doesn't have to be necessarily cut and dry, here are the 7 things I'm talking about, but share that agenda, give people an idea of what's going to happen. I also suggest, if they're necessary, including content warnings. These are important for lots of us who have PTSD or other mental health issues, different disabilities, things like that. Include content warnings. You don't have to warn for every possible thing, but think about, is there some really strong emotional content in your talk? Like, are you going to be telling a story from your own life that's really, really sad? Or maybe you're going to get really, really angry. Maybe you're going to yell, and that's fine. Just let people know. Maybe you're going to have some sort of unexpected activity or movement or thing that's going to happen during the talk, some weird, surprising thing, right? Let people know. Sorry, it might remove some of your drama, but it will help your audience. Also, content warn for any different kind of bigotry you might be talking about. Obviously, I'm hoping none of you are going to get up and give a sexist talk, but if you're mentioning, oh, as a woman in tech, I deal with blah, blah, blah problem, maybe leave a note at the top of the talk that you're going to go over some sexist ideas in the talk. Or just any really, really difficult topic. I'm sure you can imagine what those things might be. But bigotry, difficult topics, put a content warning. Helps us all out. Next, when you're structuring your talk, use multiple visual communication methods. If you're going to have images, maybe consider also charts, other kinds of visualizations. Have written words on your slides. Different people process information in different ways, and it can be useful to emphasize that with different things. Remember how I said this talk isn't perfect? These slides are mostly words. Sorry. Use multiple visual communication methods if you can. Also, if you're going to have an activity of some kind, like, oh, I don't know, something about, okay, we're all going to write our resumes. Maybe you're running a workshop, right? Or, oh, we're all going to visualize our ideal vacation, or I don't know, you have some activity for your audience, right? Make sure that those are inclusive of a wide variety of people, and also make sure that people can adapt them to their own abilities and needs and preferences. So to that end, if you were to say, all right, everybody, we're gonna count off in 3s, and then you're gonna be in a group together and do something, or find the person nearest to you, we're gonna do a thing together, right? Make group work optional. For a lot of us, doing activities with strangers, especially if they can be emotionally fraught ones, are very difficult and can get in the way of learning. So don't pressure people to have to be in a group for some kind of activity. Also make sure that movement is optional. If it's, okay, everybody who I counted off, if you're a 1, stand up and go by the kitchen, and if you're a 2, stand up and go over there. Like, give people the option to kind of stay where they are. Also, don't shame people who aren't participating. I've definitely been at events that have workshop components, where somebody's, for their own reason, having a hard time with the activity, or they're sitting out, they're doing something else for a bit. And I've seen leaders of these workshops saying, hey, what you doing? Come on, let's get to work. Or, oh no, come on, join this group. Obviously you're not doing anything because you're too scared to join a group. Let people be. Trust, unless maybe you're running an event for kids, but that's a whole other thing. If you're running an event for adults, assume that adults know what's up with themselves and they know what they need. Don't shame people who aren't participating how you want them to. In addition, if there's some kind of activity, or maybe you're just passing something out for everyone to read or everyone to take home and do something with, I don't know. Make sure that those handouts are accessible. They should have sufficiently large print. Don't make them teeny tiny just because you want them to be a single page. Also, make an electronic option available for folks, either an accessible PDF or an accessible web page of some kind, and share that link. Sometimes I know that Braille copies can often be very expensive, but if you're being sponsored or paid in some way for this event, consider that, have some Braille copies available. Really, also don't require sharing copies between people. If you're trying to save money and, I'm just gonna print a few and people can share with their neighbor. See previous about how not everybody is comfortable interacting with a stranger at an event, but people might need to use their own copy for some other reason. So make sure you have enough for everyone. Okay. You've prepared your talk, well, mostly. Now you've got some slides to work on. Now you've got some slides to work on, if you have slides. This is the meat of this talk, I would say. This is the thing I get the most questions about when people are saying, wow, Fen, you're pretty all right about giving an inclusive talk. How do you make your slides so helpful for people? This is that. Slide design. First, choose easy to read fonts. There are a lot of people who have opinions about are serif fonts easier to read on a screen, are sans serif fonts easier to read on a screen. Newsflash, different people have very different preferences around this. So unless someone from your audience or something you know about who you're speaking to has a really strong preference, don't worry about it, it's okay. Just pick an easy to read font. Don't pick something cursive, something swoopy or weird. Also, don't pick a mono-spaced font, like the sort of font somebody would write code with. Don't pick fonts with weird letter spacing. Try to have usually the default letter spacing to your font. It can be really nice to make things really cool and designerly, but the point of the slides is to make them readable. So prioritize that. Also, my biggest tip, if I had to say that you should read only one slide in this whole thing, it would be this one about good contrast. It's my biggest pet peeve. Make sure your slides have sufficient contrast for your audience. There are different tools you can use to input your colors into for your text and your background, and it'll tell you, it'll evaluate them against different rules for color, and it'll tell you if it has enough contrast. It'll tell you if it has enough contrast. I recommend, though, that you be a bit stricter on yourself, and contrast testing tools will be on you. That's because, unlike, usually those are thinking about a person looking at a screen, right? But often when you're presenting, you're gonna be in a weird environment, right? It'll be a projector or a weird tiny TV screen or a bright room with a projector that's too dim. Things are weirder in physical space when you're presenting. So be very strict with yourself under contrast. Always assume that you are going to get a really crappy projector when you project your slides. Just always assume that. Good ways to test this, take your laptop or whatever you're making slides on and turn the brightness down a bunch and make sure your slides are still readable. Just always assume that the projector will be weird and bad and not set correctly. It really, in the end, with contrast, readable slides with sufficient contrast are way more important than fun slides. I'm sorry. And there are still ways to make them beautiful and interesting and engaging, but readable is more important than fun. My other big tip for good contrast is if you know the environment you're going to be presenting in, you should take that into account when designing the slides. So I've been to the nerdery before. I'm familiar with the nerdery setup. I knew that the lights in this room would be on and that I would have a projector that's projecting my slides. So I know that in a light environment, I should be using dark text on a light background. But if I were to be presenting in, say, a room that is dark, all the lights are off, and the only light is a spotlight on me and my slides. In a dark environment, you should be using light text on a dark background. There's a lot of science behind this around how the human eye works, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into it, but it also helps people who can be overstimulated by too bright of light. So we want to think about that. But this is your rule of thumb. Dark environment, light text on dark background. In a light environment, dark text on the light background. Also, if you don't know where you're going to be presenting, I recommend defaulting to dark text on a light background. At worst, it'll just be a little bit too bright for the room you're in, but it will still be readable. Okay, We have good contrast. What next? Avoid the edges of your slides. This is another way in which these slides are not perfect. Avoid the edges of your slides if you can. Always assume that the view of your slides for your audience will be at least partially obstructed. Most often this will happen where the projector screen or the TV you're presenting on will be kind of low to the ground. And audience members' heads might cover up the bottom of the slides or what have you, right? I recommend staying away from the bottom, maybe 5th or 6th of your slides. That bottom edge is the one that is most commonly in a lot of setups covered up. Again, I didn't try too hard because I've been to the nerdery and I knew that nothing would really be obstructing these slides except this unfortunate pillar right here. You and I keep like missing each other. There's an audience member who like is right behind a pillar. Oh, yeah, hi, how's it going? Hi, okay. Anyways, so I knew that these slides wouldn't really be obstructed unless you're behind a pillar, but what can you do? Okay, avoid the edges. What next? Make your text as large as you can while maintaining readability. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, if it's really big, it'll be readable, right? Not the case. If you were to make your text so big that there was maybe one word on each line, it's actually gonna be harder for people to parse. We're used to lines of text being of a certain character width. If you make your text too big, it's actually gonna get harder to read for a lot of folks. So, yes, make it pretty big. You have space on your slides, make it big. White space is really cool in designs. I love me some white space, but when the point of the slides is to be readable, consider make your words bigger. Another tip, don't communicate your meanings solely through color. This might be in cases where you're trying to show an example of do this, or do this, don't do this. Maybe you are highlighting the photo of the thing to do in green and the thing not to do in red. Don't communicate that only through colors. Try and, in addition to colors, using a symbol of some kind or just words. Don't assume that your audience will be able to correctly perceive the colors you want them to. The other important thing is, even if your audience has a perfect color vision, your projector might be really weird. I'll often find that projectors are not calibrated correctly for colors, and I'll turn around and see that my slides do not look like the colors I thought it was supposed to look like. So don't only use color to communicate things. Here's another relatively easy one. If you have a video embedded in your slides that you're showing for some reason, make sure it has captions. Captions are important. Another thing related to amount of text on slides, avoid overloading a slide with too much text. I'm sure a lot of us have seen a talk of some kind where there's like paragraphs and paragraphs on a slide, which I know is the norm in some industries, like in academia. It can be important for reasons I don't understand, but it can be the norm for some folks to have a ton of text on a slide. If your goal, though, is for your audience at your event to be able to read the slide, consider don't do that. Don't overload it. I also recommend not splitting up thoughts between multiple slides. Now, I mean, you can have a big overarching thought you're communicating over lots of slides, that's fine, but try to have one complete thought per slide. Try to not break it up a bunch. Make sure if somebody's looking and paying attention to the one single slide that you have up, that they can still understand what you're trying to communicate. It's also really helpful for folks later on who are experiencing your talk just by looking through your slides, who aren't hearing you talk as you give this. Yeah, one complete thought per slide. Okay, we know how to make slides. Now, the day of your talk. Usually, by this I mean on-site. You're at the venue, or you're an hour before your meeting, or what have you. You're close to the time of your talk. What do? Okay, my big tip. Observe a talk in the space you are speaking in, if possible. And this applies more to like a conference or something like that. But if you can, be in the space you're going to talk in and watch the talk. Even if it has nothing to do with you and isn't relevant to your life at all, if you can, observe it. You'll have an understanding of how well somebody could maybe hear in the back of the room. You'll have an understanding of how the audience is reacting. You'll have an understanding of how the microphone works. So many things that you can only get by really watching a talk as an audience member. So do it if you can. Also, do an actual microphone test, because hopefully you're being given a microphone. If there is a sound person who is in charge of administering the microphones and stuff, they will happily help you with this because it's their job. But if there isn't one, take a few minutes for yourself, and it doesn't matter if the whole audience is here waiting for you. Do a microphone test. Don't just say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Try saying actual sentences. Those of you who were here early got to see me doing this. Try saying actual sentences and walk around in the space that you think you might walk around in as you give your talk. Walk across the stage or whatever. Have somebody who can help you out by walking around the room as you do your microphone test to ensure that volume is good across the room. Often we're tempted to say, oh, stand all the way in the back. And if you can hear it all the way in the back, then you can hear it in the middle. Not always the case with speaker setup. So have somebody there to help you out. Also, know where you can and can't walk on the stage or the front of the room or wherever you're presenting. Know where you can and can't walk for people to see you, for microphones to pick you up, things like that. Especially if you're being recorded. Have an idea of where the camera can and can't see you. Important. Really important with all of that, though, is do not rely on that question of, can everyone hear me? It's often a thing that events I'll see people when they get up to the front and they're excited and they've been introduced and they turn on their microphone and they say, okay, my name's Fen. Can everyone hear me okay? One, you probably should have already done a microphone test to make sure it works well. But also, the not fun thing about that is if somebody can't hear you, you're relying on them to yell, yeah, I can't hear you, because I have this thing going on with me that means I have a hard time hearing, so you need to turn it up. You're relying on your audience members to out themselves as having a need, which that sucks, right? Sometimes people will feel comfortable doing that, but a lot of the times people won't, right? In that same way, don't rely on, oh, can everybody see my slides okay? Or things like that. Have people who will be able to walk around and test it all for you. Don't make the audience do it for you. It's no good. I already said that. Don't require audience members to out themselves. It's so important. I guess I said it on my slides twice. Okay, cool. Next. Share your slides ahead of time, like you all saw me demonstrate. One way to do that is on Twitter. You can actually schedule a tweet and use the event hashtag and put the link, and then people can see your slides. Put them on Speaker Deck or Google Slides or something like that. More than anything, I recommend doing what I did, which is providing your link to the slides in your slides at the beginning. So that way audience members, for whatever reason they might need them, can see the slides. It's so, so helpful to so many of us. Okay, so during your talk, oh, can I get half-hearted? Ooh. That was way more half-hearted than earlier. Thank you, I appreciate it. No, we need an appropriate amount of enthusiasm for this time of night. Okay, during your talk, well, start by learning about your audience, which you saw me do. Ask them questions, have them raise their hand, make a noise, whatever they can do, that are relevant to adapting your talk, right? Not everybody is comfortable adapting their talk on the fly, things like that, but if you can, try to adapt it. There have been talks I prepared at events where what I was told by the organizers was, yeah, these are all going to be back-end web developers, and they all know this language, and that's who you're going to be speaking to. And so I wrote my talk about, oh, how as a back-end developer, come on, microphone. How is a back-end? Let's try to, there we go, the microphone's back. We've had pretty good luck, haven't we? All right, what was I saying? Yes, I've written my whole talk assuming everybody here is a back-end developer. And then when I checked that assumption at the beginning of my talk, there were not a lot of back-end developers at my particular session. And so we adapted on the fly. Because if I were to give a talk to a room full of designers, assuming that they're all back-end developers, they're gonna have a bad time and feel bad, right? And they're not gonna get anything out of it. And then I'm gonna feel bad because I'm gonna be up here and they all have confused looks on their faces. And if I had just bothered to ask what their job is, we all would have had a way better time. Well, I did bother to ask, but you know what I mean. It's a hypothetical example. So adapt your audience, check your assumptions. If you're making an assumption, check it. I also recommend telling the audience if you're making an assumption about them. Just lay it out like I did. Treat your audience with kindness and compassion. Okay, I think actually, maybe if there were 2 slides you pay attention to, this should be the other one. It's okay if your audience members walk out on you. I promise you, it rarely has anything to do with you. They have a need of some kind that requires them to leave the room. Or maybe they're just not getting anything out of your talk. That's cool. People leaving early is not an insult to you, unless they like yell at you and flip you off, then it's an insult to you. But it's okay if people leave early. It's not about you. If people are looking at their phone or their laptop as you're talking, that's fine. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. Let's try it again. It's totally fine. There we go. They might be using some kind of assistive tech. Maybe they're watching captions of what you're saying. Maybe they're furiously taking notes of some kind. Maybe they're using it to be able to deal with the emotions they're experiencing right now so they can pay attention to you. A thing I'll often tell friends when I'm at an event with them is, hey, if when you're giving your talk, I'm not making eye contact with you and I'm on my phone a lot, it's because I'm live tweeting your talk because I love your talk so much. Like, free inside tip. If you're ever at a conference with me and I'm just like sitting there half kind of looking at the speaker nodding, I probably don't like the talk because I'm not tweeting about it. Yeah, right? So if somebody's using their phone, that's fine, it's fine, don't worry about it. Also, if somebody's fiddling around with something or fidgeting or squirming, like that's fine. It's not about you, it's about them. Like, unless they're yelling at you and flipping you off while they fidget, then it's about you. But like, it's not about you. I even put the words, it's not about you, on this slide. Whatever your audience members are doing, it's okay. Now, I am a person with a whole anxiety disorder, and I still have to remind myself of that, right? If people in this room right now are looking at their phones or things like that, it's okay, it's fine. It doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. Another important tip, speak clearly and slowly, and don't cover your mouth. Remember how my talk isn't perfect? I've probably spoken pretty quickly a few times. That's okay. Try to speak slowly, don't cover your mouth. Simple. Also, use simple and clear language when you're talking. Define any terms or acronyms you're using, even if you think probably everyone in your audience knows what they are. At worst, you've spent 3 seconds defining a term, and at best, you've made a key observation for someone in your audience. And this doesn't mean like you can't tell a joke, don't get me wrong, like make jokes, you know, whatever. Just make the important parts of this simple and clear to follow. Another very important thing that very often I will see speakers trip up on, I guess. Usually it's not people intentionally messing this up, but it's people not thinking about it. Avoiding harmful language that might be accidentally directed at your audience members during your talk. I'm not going to necessarily say all the examples of this, but you can look them up. Avoid gender essentialism in your talk. I was at a tech event also recently, also not in Chicago, where somebody was giving a diversity and inclusion talk. And I think their point was to be good about, you know, women in the tech industry facing sexism and things like that. But throughout a lot of their talk, it was like, this was a man giving the talk or a little more context. Like, they were talking things like, men are like this, and oh, but women are all empathetic and nice and kind, and so women should be more in the tech. Just kind of crap like that, right? Things like that. Men are like this, women are like this. Or, oh, don't you hate it when women do this? Well, this is a whole separate talk, and I've given that whole separate talk, but there are those of us who are non-binary who those things do not apply to. And generally, you're making generalizations about women that feel really crappy when you do that. So try not to. Also, avoid casual ableism when you're speaking. There are lists of these sorts of words online, but generally, if you find yourself using a word to refer to yourself or someone else or a concept that has anything to do with like intelligence or cognition, like idiot or dumb or words like this. Fun fact, those are words that have their roots in ableist terms and slurs used against people with disabilities. So even if you're saying like, oh, I feel so stupid for blah, 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 avoid these words if you can. Come on, microphone, there we go. Avoid these words if you can. Cool, we're gonna keep going. Sorry, I keep getting so tripped up on this microphone. I appreciate you bearing with me. Generally, any small microaggressions, making assumptions about large groups of people. Again, you can look up some examples of this. I'm going to go a little bit quicker for time. Another thing that I see, specifically white people, we do this a lot in a talk. If someone's name is like, some person you're attributing a quote to or a name of a place, the phrase, "Oh, I don't know how to pronounce this, but I'll give it a try." Or like, "Oh, I don't know how that's supposed to be said, but I think it's this," or blah, blah, blah. "Oh, I'm sorry, I really butchered that name." Fun fact, I'm assuming you were the one who prepared your talk, and you were the one who knew what names you were gonna say. So like, white people, we have no excuse. Like, look it up and do it right. Sorry, not sorry. You have time to prepare. It's really easy. Cool. Okay, moving right along. Pause often. The joke is that I paused. Pause often. Give people time to absorb, to think, to take notes, to breathe. It will also often help you as a speaker to like calm down if you're freaking out about your microphone not working. Pause. It also gives your lovely live caption author time to catch up. Stuff like that. Pause. Okay. Cover all displayed text on your slides. It doesn't have to be exactly word for word, but don't put sentences up on your slides and kind of never talk about them. It's really confusing for your audience members. It makes folks worry that they missed something somehow. Cover everything that's on your slide. To that end, you need to describe your visuals. Images or videos or graphs or whatever it is, you have to describe them. If you included it on your slide and it's not just decorative, like a scribble, right? Something or like a cute clip art of a person waving, stuff like that. If it's just purely decorative, you don't have to. Otherwise, you need to describe it. Consider what's important. If it was important enough for you to put it on your slide, it's important enough for your audience members to understand what the heck you're talking about. This includes all images. This includes all funny little GIFs. Even if it's just like a reaction GIF of like a frog making a confused face to like emphasize your emotion, right? Like, describe that. You have to tell your audience what's going on. Also, communicate emotional content. This is important. In addition to saying, telling your joke and then there's a confused frog GIF, say what that GIF is, but also include the fact that it's confused. People might not necessarily understand the emotion you're trying to convey with the image. Also, as I kind of said before, if you don't think the image is worth describing, then consider whether you actually need it. Images that are just kind of up on a slide can often be really distracting for a lot of us, especially if they're GIFs. I know a lot of speakers in the tech industry really enjoy putting like funny GIFs on our slides because like GIFs, they're funny, they're fun. We like GIFs, but like every time there's a looping GIF on a slide and a speaker just saying something for 5 minutes, I can't pay attention to them and I end up staring at the cute frog GIF, right? Unless your talk is about staring at a GIF, I digress. Anyways, consider whether you really need it. Images can be engaging, but also super distracting. Interpret any graphs and charts you have on your slides. Not only for folks who can't see them, but also for folks who are maybe not reading it very quickly or having a hard time understanding the point of it. Share the key information about it. Say things like, "Oh, and in this graph of the number of pirates in the 1800s, it increased over this period of time and then went down." I don't know, whatever, right? Whatever your example is. Narrate the thing, get the key information out of the visual so everyone gets it. Another important thing related to that is to avoid saying spatial words. I'm blanking on the name of the person who came up with this concept, but try to avoid this, that, or here, referring to visuals. For folks who cannot see my slides, I'm about to say things that intentionally are not actually describing anything, they're just examples. Don't say things like, "This is our agenda, as you can see." Or, "Did you over there, did you agree with that? Did you," oh, come on microphone, there we go. "Did you over there, did you agree with that?" Or you can submit feedback there. Or, oh, this person in front, what do you think? Right? Those things do not make any sense to somebody who cannot see what you're pointing to or indicating. Also to somebody who's like not paying attention to you. Maybe somebody who also just isn't looking up. Maybe they're watching live captions. Maybe they're doing whatever, right? Don't use spatial words if you can. And at the end, when you have Q&A, as hopefully we'll have time for, you need to repeat audience. Oh, come on, microphone. There we go. Repeat audience questions into your microphone if they don't have a microphone of their own. And I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. We'll find out. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Home stretch, part number 7. Taking care of yourself, because you're a person too. And it's important your talk be an inclusive and accessible talk to you. Accept it when you make a mistake. You are probably going to mess up somehow. Hopefully not in a big awful way, but you're probably going to mess up your talk somehow. And it's going to maybe accidentally not have enough contrast, or you're going to forget to describe an image. Oh, come on, microphone. There we go. You're going to forget to describe an image, or something's going to go wrong, and that's okay. Just accept it. You're not perfect. It's okay. Some of us need to hear that. Some people are even taking photos. They need to hear it so bad. I'm going to give them time because that's important. Some of us need that reminder. Okay, I think you all took a photo. Great, excellent. If you mess up in some way in your talk, it's a learning experience. It's okay. If you hurt someone with what you did, maybe you accidentally used some language that was hurtful. Maybe you, I don't know, forgot to use a microphone. I don't know, whatever. You did something that hurt somebody, and they tell you that, you need to apologize. Genuinely apologize. And listen to what they've said. It's a learning experience. It's also really important to know that your audience members might have conflicting needs, even within your audience. Here's some examples. Eye contact. There might be some of us who have a hard time paying attention if the speaker isn't like actively engaging with us and like looking around the room and connecting. There are also those of us who will be incredibly uncomfortable if a speaker makes eye contact with us. It's okay. People have conflicting needs. You can't make it perfect for everyone in that case. Also, people have conflicts in the amount of info they like to have on slides. Some people, for their own needs, need to have complete thoughts, complete concepts on a slide. Lots of, a whole, maybe you're putting code up on a slide, you're a programmer trying to communicate something about some code. And some people might need to have a whole big block of code on the slide to understand what you mean. Other people might need a small amount of information to be able to parse it. And that's okay. You can't do everything for everybody. Maybe find a happy medium. Here's the other thing that a lot of folks don't necessarily, microphone, there we go. The other thing people might not necessarily think about is color contrast. There are folks who, I can just give an example from my own life. My wife has an anomalous form of color blindness, so she has a lot of difficulty telling a lot of different colors apart. So she needs things to have a pretty high contrast to understand what's going on. Her father has a light sensitivity issue, and he cannot have too much contrast, otherwise it will hurt and he will have a hard time reading it. Right? You have to find a happy medium that has enough contrast, but not too much. And I say this all not to sound like overwhelming, but it's rather to remind you that audience members will have conflicting needs. You just kind of gotta do your best to help as many people as you can. And fundamentally, because people have conflicting needs, you will not be able to make your talk perfect for every person. It's just a thing to accept. You also have to give yourself the space and the time you need to succeed in giving your talk. The idea of don't light yourself on fire to keep other people warm. If you are not able to, for your own reasons and your own needs and your own abilities, able to do something in all this, maybe you, for whatever reason, can't do all the color contrast testing, or you aren't able to describe all of your images fully, or things like that, it's okay. You're a person too. Give yourself what you need to succeed. Ask for help. Because making it a safe and accessible experience matters for you too. An important thing, my last point, is you need to solicit feedback in a healthy way. There are some people where after they give a talk can immediately walk into the audience and be like, oh, what'd you think? Tell me everything I did wrong. I want to know. I want to know right now. Some people, I know, someone's making a face of like, what? I'm shocked. But it's like, some people like that, and some people like need to know right away. And if that's you, okay, that's not me, but that's fine, right? If you're a person who like feels pressured to like listen to feedback immediately, but you know for your own well-being and your ability to improve that you need like a day and then you can ask for feedback, that's okay too. I recommend as an audience member, therefore, to keep that in mind when someone gives a talk and ask them, hey, are you open to feedback on the talk you just gave? Because some people might not be, even if it's praise. Some of us can't handle praise right away. So here's my way of soliciting feedback in a healthy way. My goal with every talk I give is one, did one person laugh? Check mark. I heard some of you laughing. Someone's laughing right now. Perfect. Excellent. Achieved. My second goal is always, did somebody learn something? Can you like raise your hand or make a noise if you learned something? Yes, almost all of you learned something. Ha ha ha. My goal is achieved. My master plan. Excellent. Cool. Well, I was Fen Slattery, and I will continue to be Fen Slattery. Yeah. My website is fenslattery.com. I actually have a bunch more resources up there about all sorts of diversity and inclusion and accessibility stuff. I also, relevant to this talk, have a talk I have given about how to get invited to give talks and get paid for it. I just said the word get a lot. That was confusing. Anyways, I have a lot of cool things you could look at on my website that will help you give talks, stuff like that. You can applaud now. Thank you. It's always hard when you transition from a talk to Q&A, like, it's that awkward moment. Okay, cool. So we have a tiny bit of time, but I can maybe take, here's my note about questions. Questions at an event like this are like Jeopardy, right? Your questions should be formed in the format of a question. Formed? Oh, come on, microphone. Don't cut it on me now. I'm trying so hard. Did it actually just die? Can I have the other microphone? Where'd it go? Come on. It's back. Okay. That ruined the timing of my joke. Questions are like Oh, no. Oh, no. Questions are like Jeopardy. They should be formed as a question, not as a statement. Also, unlike Jeopardy, I am not Alex Trebek. You shouldn't ask me a question to prove that you know something. You should instead ask me a question because you actually don't know the answer. I will take a few questions. Also, I'm on Twitter. I'm sorry we don't have much time, but I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards too about questions you might have. Does somebody have like a really good, juicy question that will be relevant to a lot of us? Yeah.
So at the beginning, you were talking a bit about kind of inspiring emotion first and kind of making that a priority. And I could imagine kind of going into preparing for a talk and kind of having content and feeling maybe that it's kind of dry or not maybe knowing how to bring that level of sort of energy and ease into it. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about that. So the emotion that, oh my God, this microphone. I'm gonna try the other one. Thank you. I really appreciate your patience with this microphone thing. And you're wonderful. I don't know your name, nerdery employee, but you're wonderful and very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so the emotion I might default to in that case, if I'm worried it's dry, is curiosity. I want to give my audience a taste of this thing, but let them know that I didn't teach them everything about the thing. And make them go, oh man, that person told me, this and this and this and this, but they said there was more to know about this and I want to go home and look it up. But that might be what I would default to if you're worried it's dry. Yeah, make people curious. Make them want to learn more. And you can do that by reminding them that you don't know everything, but also including points in your talk, like I did, in which you say, oh, there's so much more and so many other thoughts I have about that, but I don't have time for them. Yeah, make people curious and want to learn more. That's my tip. Does that answer your question? Cool, that answers the question. What other questions do folks have? It's okay if you don't have questions. I accept that. We're also low on time, so it's probably good for all of us if you don't have questions. Okay, cool. Well, I really appreciate you all coming. Again, feel free to talk to me more on Twitter and stuff like that. Thank you.
I didn't take live stream questions.
There you go.
All right. Oops. Now the microphone hates me.
Oh, I turned it off. I shouldn't have turned it off
So
before
we're
I ended
good.
it. You got it?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Fen, thank you for that talk. Very informative. I learned a lot. We'll apply a lot of the notes that I took today. If you have any questions, please let us know. We also have Alex in the back. If you would like to be a volunteer for the access guide. Oh,
I do it.
yes, of course. Come on up.
Thanks so much for that.